Okay. So, as I discussed about the brainstorming session, that is the what is the difference between the group discussion, panel discussion and brainstorming session, and now we will have the session on the brainstorming session. I will demonstrate that is the how the brainstorming session is to be held. So, these students they will introduce themselves and they will demonstrate the brainstorming session. So, I will start first with Rohit.
So, hello, good morning everybody. My name is Rohit Kumar Pandey. I have completed my mechanical engineering from KITS Ramtech, Nagpur University. I also have 28 months of work experience at Tata Consultancy Services Limited. I am currently pursuing my MBA from DOMS IIT Roorkee. As a part of my life project, I did my internship at thinkingspree.com. I am also doing a live project at Divyang Kumit, which works towards the inclusiveness of physically disabled people.
My name is Jivesh Agarwal. I did my mechanical engineering from YMC Institute of Engineering, Faridabad. After that, I worked in TCS as a systems engineer. During my TCS working, I also opened a startup named B2Cap Services. Currently, I am pursuing MBA from Department of Management Studies, IIT Roorkee. I also worked on an assignment on technology management for the Is Your Company Ready for Digital Future?
Very good. Right.
Good morning everyone.
एक मिनट. हाँ. Last का line फिर से वो digital first. I have done the assignment.
I also have completed an assignment on technology management on the topic Is Your Company Ready for Digital Future?
Okay. Very good. Yes.
Good morning everyone. My name is Nivesh Dhote and I have completed my electrical engineering from Samrat Ashok Technological Institute, Vidisha, Madhya Pradesh. Currently I am pursuing my MBA from Department of Management Studies, IIT Roorkee. Prior to that, I have served TCS for 15 months as an EIS developer at their Nagpur facility, and I am a KPMG Six Sigma certified, and I have just done my winter internship at Secotools India Limited, Pune.
Good.
Hello everyone, I am Abhishek Soni. I did my mechanical engineering from Medicaps Institute of Technology, Indore, Madhya Pradesh. Followed by I have a work experience of 52 months at Infosys Limited in Mysore as well as in Pune. Currently I am pursuing my MBA in Department of Management Studies, IIT Roorkee, and here I am acting as a placement coordinator. I also certified in Lean Six Sigma, which is offered by KPMG.
Okay. Now all these 4 participants they will demonstrate about the brainstorming session.
Hello everyone. Today we are here to have a brainstorming session over the topic how to increase the sales team efficiency. So within this we will be having the factors which are affecting the sales team efficiency, as well as we will be giving some suggestions and we will be discussing the suggestions how to improve the sales efficiency. So within this session each one of us will be taking 2 minutes time as a group, so to jot down all the points and the factors, and then we'll have a final discussion over the same, and then we'll give the final conclusion what can be the better thing for the sales efficiency. Team, I think we can start the same.
Yes.
So we'll be discussing the same. I'll be acting as a participant as well as the moderator for this session. Yeah, so yeah, Jivesh. Any factors or suggestions that's coming to your mind?
Yeah, I think the factors which are most important for sales guys is the domain knowledge in which field they are working.
Okay. Or domain and product knowledge. Like
Domain knowledge and particularly the product knowledge, which product they are selling,
okay.
and all those new technologies which are coming up in that domain.
Okay. Technology also.
Domain, new technologies in the domain.
Okay. Okay.
According to me, there is one factor
Yeah.
named competitive analysis. Means you should know these competitors. Sales team should know the competitors, how they are working, and accordingly make the sales pitch.
Understanding the
Yeah.
competitors' offerings
Yes.
and sales technique. Yeah.
I'd like to add one point in this competitors knowledge. There are two categories. One is point of parity and one is point of differentiation.
Yes.
So I think salesperson should be aware of both of them. Like points of parity,
Yes.
which points are similar to our product,
Okay.
and points of differentiation.
Okay.
And the target should be realistic.
Yeah.
You can have POP and POE.
Points of parity and points of difference.
Yeah. And in my opinion, the salesperson should have the knowledge of the demography and
Okay.
the knowledge about the customer.
In which location they are targeting their
Yeah.
product. That's a good point. And I think one more thing, like the target should be realistic. Like salespeople should not be given unrealistic targets.
Yes.
Impractical.
In practice, I mean, those should be achievable.
Yeah. So
you can-
realistic target you can.
Even I'll include my points here.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah.
Salesperson should have also about the knowledge about the customer which they are
Yeah.
focusing on.
Actually, apart from this demographics and this customer, you should also know the customer behavior. So we do market research. We try to
Based
find
on
out
that.
some things.
Yeah.
So the salesperson should know that things, and accordingly he can plan the sales pitch so that he can
Understanding customer behavior.
understand the customer behavior.
सब जिनके पास माइक नहीं है सब तेज बोलो माइक नहीं हो अंडरस्टैंडिंग कस्टमर बिहेवियर
Yes.
या
I will also like to add some points. Salesperson should have better incentives. So if
Correct.
they have better incentives, they will be motivated,
Motivated.
from within.
Correct,
So
correct.
to increase the motivation factor, they should have better incentive schemes.
No. This incentive should be monetary as well as appreciation is also included in that.
Correct.
Like sometimes appreciation does a good job.
And also a good team leader. So team leader motivates the salespeople. So that point can also be included.
I mean the complete team should be given awards or
Yeah.
letter of appreciations.
So like rewarding the high achieving
Best
people.
performer.
Yeah, best
Oh, good.
performer we can say.
Recognition, no? Recognition.
Recognition.
Yeah.
So one point I would like to add is they should have good leave schemes also, as
Okay.
they are away from their family most of the time. They have
Okay.
to travel from different cities.
Cities also.
Yeah. So they should have good leave schemes so that they can be with their family.
Okay.
This will also increase the motivation factor.
think one more point
Yeah.
which is very important with sales is lead generation.
Okay.
And lead generation should be segment wise.
Okay.
Segmented lead generation.
So like proper segmenting of customers
Yeah,
should be
proper
done.
segmenting of customers.
Have you written training part?
Yeah, training I think it's not yet.
Solutions
Yeah,
will be there, no?
so I think the proper training should be given, just like sales negotiations,
okay.
skills, customer service skills. So after the selling the product to the sales team should have that motivation to serve him again.
Okay.
So if he faces any problem, so proper training on sales negotiations,
training.
customer service, etc.
So I guess the communication part will also come in the
Exactly.
training
Which
part.
plays a very
Yeah.
crucial role for sales pitching. Even I think technology can be a major boon in terms of sales. Like better advertisement. If suppose customer should be better
Yeah.
aware of the product.
For that, I think integration of marketing and sales is important.
Yeah.
What marketing company is doing and what
Yes,
we have to convey.
It's a very valid point.
Integration of sales and marketing. Even marketing will cover the advertisements as well.
Yes, yeah.
Like they should be more informative rather than in limited space of time period. Like advertisement, they cover just 60 to 90 seconds, but they give more information about the product. So
And one more thing is like they should have better forecasting techniques.
okay,
Like how much to
yeah,
sell.
yeah, correct.
It's also
Correct.
they should
To
know
reduce inventory stock and like production, everything we can plan properly.
think
That's a very valid point.
In practical sales target which we are talking now, that should be based on forecasting also.
Yes, yes.
Like it should not be
It can
some
be linked with that
constant
point.
thing. Like this target is constant. It should be flexible target.
Correct.
Yes, yes.
Based on, because in our country like sales may depend on festival season
Yes,
also,
yes,
they
yes.
may rise, so
Yes,
it's
yes.
not fixed. We have better forecasting of sales forecast.
So I think should they be trained on that? Means the sales people.
I
How
think
to
I
forecast
think
and
that should be the work of
That
backend.
back-
support.
yeah, I think other teams come into
They
the
should be
picture
given the
and
data.
yeah,
Yes.
they should be given data, so accordingly they can plan their targets, the sales team.
Okay.
And also they should also identify leaders within the team.
Okay.
Like there are many salespeople who are
Good
leaders
performer,
also.
yeah.
Okay, so
So they can also like they can give them higher positions in the team.
Okay.
They can promote them. It can be done.
means their leader should come from within
within the
their
team.
community.
Yes.
Okay.
Within their team.
Yes.
Good team leaders.
They should be aware of about the USP of their product.
I think domain knowledge will cover
knowledge and yeah.
about everything, what their features will be and offerings.
And customer feedback means.
Even that is very important.
For further
Correct. Customer feedback and reviews.
Yes. And also there should be policies for on-time reimbursement. Like if a
Okay.
salesperson has to go to different
Okay.
city,
Okay.
so most of the time is consumed in reimbursing the previous bills.
So like okay.
That process should be small and
Okay.
convenient. Yeah. So it will save his time.
Okay.
That we can include in some better incentive schemes.
Exactly, that's what I was.
It is in GBS second.
Yeah, better incentive scheme.
Okay.
and on-time reimbursement, even write that.
On time reimbursement.
On time reimbursement. Okay.
I think one major problem with sales guy is transportation problem. They travel a lot.
So like they should be assigned area where they need not
I
have to
think
travel
we
too
can
much.
do this route optimization for this.
Yes,
problem.
route optimization. we can-
Exactly.
Better route optimization.
can give for suggestion?
I think customer needs also is covered, no? Understanding customer offerings.
Yes.
Customer needs what they actually, okay, customer behavior.
Customer behavior we can is covered.
I think like customer database also we can use efficiently. And suppose we are targeting some particular segment of people or customers. So if we have their database, our sales pitch will be accordingly decided, like in what way. I mean, it will more relevant to customer behavior. Suppose he's more oriented towards travel. I mean, if suppose we are having database that customer is more oriented towards traveling, so we can pitch accordingly to give our offerings and products. So
His
anything it will be
timing we
covered.
should also note. His favorable
Yeah.
timings when he want to listen. It's like we are going and he's not there.
That is understanding.
I think
customer
it's a
behavior.
broad term. It can cover all the aspects.
I think we can go for suggestions now.
Yeah.
We should work for
So
suggestions.
like how to implement these
Yeah,
suggestions.
how we can.
Out of this, we should I think segregate the most important points.
Correct.
So, which all of you means.
I think demographics.
Yeah,
At
demographics.
what particular area we are targeting.
Yes.
So I'll just highlight. Any others? Domain knowledge is a crucial point.
Integration of sales and marketing. Yes.
Integration of sales and marketing.
Better forecasting.
Yes. Which one? This one.
Realistic targets are there.
Understanding customer behavior.
Yeah, customer behavior. Yes. I think more or less, more are important only.
Yeah.
But anyways, yes, still we can highlight.
Means
Which are
Competitors' knowledge. We have written some.
yes, competitors' offerings.
Customer feedback is very.
Reimbursement also we can take because for we have to have a solution for that.
Yeah, reimbursement. Training is also important, but we have to.
Yeah.
we will
Have some suggestion.
consider it that it is already imparted.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it should be recurring. Like
The training.
product will change,
so
features
yes,
will
yes,
change.
Yes. So whatever solution we bring means we can improve the training part also.
Yes.
in that.
So we can suggest some solution like and platform which is accessible to each and every sales
Correct.
person
From any.
I'll
from
just-
any place. If there is
So-
training also, he can access the training from that
Any
same
place,
platform.
For training, he should not go to the headquarters.
Yes.
Yes. So common platform for easily access to trainings.
Yes.
So I think we can have an app in which
Yeah.
all the
Yeah,
functionalities
app
are
based. Yeah,
I was
correct.
also
Correct.
thinking
Yes,
about some
Correct,
applications.
App based. Yeah.
So in app also we can also include the reimbursement part.
Yeah,
Like they
that
can
be
just,
easily on
take
one
the-
click, two
yeah.
clicks.
Print out and like scan the bill and just
they can just upload
So
it.
I think the app will be having same features
Yes,
also.
Yes,
no?
yes.
You can put it there.
Yes, it can be credited immediately, I think.
Which one?
By scanning the bill that you got.
Exactly.
So he can get the reimbursement
Within
ASAP. Means the
as soon as possible. Once the team confirms.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also the customer behavior.
I think this forecasting thing can also be covered in app
Yes,
only.
yes,
Like
yes.
they will just have by this month, initial of month every month that this month we are having target of this thing.
Yes.
So they will be given the data set of the forecasting that this and these things are there,
Correct.
and how you can predict that next month what will be the
sales target or what will be the predictions
Yeah.
for the next month.
Customer behavior and competitor offering also we can just have from the application.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
They can just look for there will be a database.
Okay.
So they will have access to it and they can just see how is the customer behavior, what is the competitor offering.
Okay.
They can have a better knowledge about the product based on that.
The same product comparison we can give like on Flipkart or something. They give product comparison, no? or 2-3 products. So we can give like that only, and they can filter also which product they want to check.
I think the same thing policybazaar.com gives. It gives all the premiums of different policies that companies offer. So that kind of platform also we can develop there.
Yeah.
For this
So I
sales
think
part, we can go
Yeah,
for
it will
virtual learning.
Which one?
For sales training, we can go for virtual learnings.
Okay.
Videos will be there from the leaders.
Okay.
Or product knowledge. You can most of the companies are nowadays going for virtual learning.
Okay.
And one more thing the app can cover is like they don't have to come to their head office for their daily attendance. They
Okay,
can
yeah.
just punch it from their app.
Yeah. Correct.
So this will increase their efficiency.
Actually reduce
And
the
even travel time,
Travel
exactly.
time it will be significantly reduced.
Punching attendance through app. But will it be any like disadvantage people might misuse?
There can be some disadvantage, but like if a person has to go from location A to location B, so he
Okay.
can go to location B where he has to report.
Okay, and from there,
The app can identify his location,
okay.
and then it can punch.
If GPS
Okay.
is enabled, it will show where he is.
Yes.
Actually, we can have pre-planned their appointments.
Exactly.
The leader
One
will
day
know
before,
Yeah.
2 days before.
Yes.
Leader will know that he is having the appointment. So by tracking the means his GPS, he can know that he is there at the customer place and he is doing his work.
And the attendance has to be approved by the leader only.
Yes.
So that can be a good point for.
Yeah. So in that case, we can use attendance.
I think we can have customer
Even
profile.
targets can be covered here in demand forecasting also it can be covered. No? Customer, what you were saying?
Customer profile.
Okay.
Means what type of customers?
Yeah.
So they can be segregated
If any
according
past
to
data
age.
is there, if any past data about the customer is available, we should give him.
Yes.
Okay.
About its likings, disliking.
Customer data we can use efficiently.
And all product data should be available on his own app. Every
Okay.
Product data.
Yeah, the same thing, domain
Yes.
knowledge. Yeah.
Also, if the person is going for B2B sales,
Okay.
so he should be knowing the negotiation terms. So MOU knowledge that what offerings the company will give and what offering from the company they will get. So
Okay.
that details also the salesperson should know. So that detail should be also there in
Okay.
his app accordingly.
Okay. So like
Extra relevant data we can just write.
okay. Technology, like yeah, anyways, we are using the technology based app only.
Yes. So I guess mostly the points are covered in our application.
Correct.
Yeah.
Even like virtual learning. So what I was thinking, pitching can be done virtually, suppose as remote areas or the So we can do pitching via emails, or we can have some online
short
meetings.
video we can do.
Online meetings.
Or we can conduct one Skype
At
call.
which location, suppose we won't be able to meet any of the customers directly,
Okay.
or like and we need them to be done. The pitching should be done as quick as possible. So in that way,
First
we
we
can
do this virtually. First
exactly
do this
we can use efficient use of technology. We can do that.
And also whatever customer they are meeting, so they can take feedback directly from the app.
Okay. Customer
So,
feedback.
customer
Okay.
on
Yeah.
that app only.
And app only, so they will also have the database, proper database,
Okay.
of whatever the responses they get from the customer.
Feedback. Customer feedback on app.
Yes.
And this can be through customer data.
Yeah.
Sales training covered in virtual learning. Yeah. Customer feedback.
feedback is
Yeah. Okay.
I think like this also covered. I guess sales training is also covered in virtual
training is
learning.
covered.
Yeah. Sales training covered in
Virtual
virtual.
pitching and everything.
Not a nice.
And
Incentives
Route
can-
for
Ah,
route
route
optimization, I
Yeah.
think, they should be given what kind of appointments are there. Their
Okay.
route should be given
okay.
through GPS. So
Okay.
that we can also do.
Yeah, I think we should give him his daily plan 2 days earlier. Like he can plan his day also like that.
Okay.
Like which point he has to go.
Actually, that will increase cost. So yes, I think.
Or a 1 day advance prior, so that he'll be knowing with tomorrow what all task he is going to do.
Okay.
So yeah, we can use that route optimization
We'll
thing in
also
that way.
include the demography part, better understanding. He can
Exactly,
just
of
plan the demography better.
knowledge, exactly.
And one small dashboard we can give how much target is left, how much
Okay.
target he has completed, or he
Okay.
can manually enter.
Yeah, many companies
day
used to do these dash, yeah. Target reports.
You can see his per day.
Yeah. Monthly targets are this much and you have achieved this much. So he can plan accordingly.
Yes.
And suppose he'll be exceeding his target, so whatever incentives he'll get, or he'll be lagging the target, so how frequently he should work more or stretch more to fulfill all those things.
Yeah.
So I think these are the few points. I think they'll cover most of the things.
Can explain.
So finally, we can. I think.
Yeah, I think so. Based on the current brainstorming session that we have, these are the few suggestions that we came across, which can increase the sales efficiency. So I hope by implementing all those things, we can have good results by the sales team.
So, as you have seen, that is the how this brainstorming session is held and it has been started, then we have to give them the time to think about. The purpose of this particular brainstorming session was that is how to stimulate the minds of the participants. And whenever we are talking about the creativity, innovation, design thinking and the expertise, so even the expert people, they are supposed to get some stimulus so that they can share their experience, their expertise with the rest of the team members very smoothly. Basically, whenever we are having the brainstorming session, we have to also ensure that is the participants, those who are into the brainstorming session, they should get a link, they should get a particular topic, they should get a particular direction. A trainer has to give a direction and then ask them to talk about that particular session. Now, here the capturing of idea is very important, and in that case, if like here you must have seen that is they are writing on the board and then summarizing that all the thought process into that particular board. At the end, one must be very sure that is the baby should not be thrown with the bathwater. It means that whatever the ideas or the solutions they have provided for a particular problem, like in this sales in this case, so that particular solution that has to be captured, that has to be noted down, and when we are concluding the solution of that particular problem, that we have to make the list, and not only the list of the solutions, we have to also give the weightage to the solutions, like we have done in the case studies also. So, we take a particular issue, when the brainstorming session is done, so there will be lot of solutions, but which one is the best solution? Which one is the best idea given by the expertise? As you have seen that we have demonstrated with the help of writing on the board, getting that particular listed, that is this solution may work, this solution may not work, and the trainees, those who before whom this particular brainstorming session will be held in your training program, that time they should also learn that is how methodically that we have to conduct the brainstorming session. So, right from the giving the problem, what trainer has to do? Trainer has to prepare a particular problem and then give that particular problem with the for the discussion and let them come out and never stop. As you have seen that we have not interfered even once, because whatever idea comes, idea may be practically possible or it may not be possible, but we should not stop them by saying that this idea is not practically possible. No, you are thinking something different. No, let them think. It is a think tank exercise, it is the developing and channelizing the brain exercise. So, let them think, let them make the application of their brain, let them understand that is the whatever they want to say they can say and then express their opinion very freely. and when they express their opinion very freely, and the trainer, that he should ensure that is the all the ideas are properly and carefully are vetted, because many times even the any very innovative idea may not be practically possible, but may link to the another solution. So, we should not stop them, we have to encourage them to participate more and more. We have to respect their expertise. We have to also see that is they are having the full flexibility and adaptability while explaining their ideas. And when whenever this convener like here Abhishek has done all this particular exercise, we will list down, we will talk about that, we will find out on the basis of the organization's internal strengths and external weaknesses also, external threats also, and therefore, in that case you can apply for the TOS matrix also, that is the what is internal, what is external, what is your strengths and weakness, what are your opportunities and threats, and then on basis of that, on the basis of the brainstorming sessions, on the basis of the opinions, on the basis of the suggestions, we can conclude that is this particular problem can be solved like in this way. And not only this, we can use this particular training session for providing the consultancy, by providing the solutions to the problems, and invite the experts that from the group of the trainees only, see their profile, understand what expertise do they have, that expertise has to be invited. One trainee can be met the convener, and he will be anchoring the whole of brainstorming process, then he listed down, and all this process will be followed, and we will get the benefit of the brainstorming session. Now, here what we have done in the group discussion, the difference, as I already also mentioned, that is here we have not taken the trainees on the basis of just as a participants. There may be the number of participants, but here we are talking about the participants, those who are having expertise in that particular area. So, when we are framing the problem as a trainer, we should keep in mind the expertise of the trainee. I am sure that is this type of sessions when you will held in your training program, then definitely the trainees will learn how not only how to conduct the brainstorming session as a technique and tool for the training program, but they will also suggest that is how to make the best use of the brainstorming session. Thank you.